I'm a fiscal conservative and I'm a social liberal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fiscal with my dollars. I ain't apologizing for not wanting to pay high taxes to anybody. I'm not apologizing for that, right? But outside of that, I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you had folks on the left that were introducing some things when we got in the whole transgender issue, and they were talking about bathrooms, or they were talking about males transitioning to females and competing against girls in sports and stuff like that. These are
In today's video, I'm going to be interacting or reacting to a couple of clips by Stephen A. Smith. Now, sometimes I could take him or leave him, but other times I think he actually makes some sense. We're going to see a little bit of both in this video. Check it out.
and that's why he's the president.
And Stephen, let me ask you, because I agree on all counts. There's a lot to unpack of what kind of went wrong for Democrats here. I think a factor is the working class feeling left behind, not reaching out to rural Americans. But what do you identify as what Democrats got wrong? And it seems like you agree Biden maybe should have stepped aside sooner.
He definitely should have stepped aside. I said it a year ago. I was on camera. Everybody was getting on me. I said a year ago, he needs to step aside.
You took some heat.
You remember, though, that he said, does everybody remember he originally said he was just going to do it for 4 years?
Right. That's what I brought up.
Right. And did you think that once you know who stepped in, he said, well, there's nobody, we don't have anybody?
Well, the point is that it's not about who you're going up against when you know you're not what you used to be. And see, this is where covering sports puts me at a distinct advantage. I cover people every day where it's time for you to go, but you're holding on and you don't want to leave.
I can recall times where, and this isn't about Stephen A. necessarily, but it's about the left media machine in general. Now, for years, even prior to 2020, many of us that lean more conservatively, many of us on the right were saying that Joe Biden was a shell of his former self. And we saw it time and time again. But what did the left say over the years? Oh, it's just a right-wing conspiracy theory. They're making up stuff. Joe Scarborough from Morning Joe even stated that he thought the current Joe Biden was the sharpest, quote unquote, was the sharpest he had ever seen, which was absolute nonsense. But then the minute he got done with that debate with Donald Trump in 2024, this year, everybody started, all the talking started. Now everyone realized what we had been saying for years. Yet again, another so-called right-wing conspiracy found to be factual. Now, as much as they hate to admit it, it's the reality.
People who cover the world of sports are accustomed to seeing that all the time. And so now here you are, to answer your question directly, you are the left, you leaned, and you were a prisoner to the extreme left in a lot of people's eyes. Well, guess what? Most of America doesn't operate on the fringes. Whether you're left or you're right, you're relatively centrist. You believe in compromise, negotiation, working with one another. Nobody gets to get everything they want. The problem is those on the fringes continuously push for you to get everything you want. They're not about getting things done. They're about getting their way.
He's pretty much on point. I would say to some degree. Now, I think I'm pretty right. I'm pretty conservative. I'm not just mildly conservative. I'm very conservative based on my biblical views, my biblical values. I have what would be considered nowadays a very conservative worldview when it comes to marriage, when it comes to sexuality and gender. I don't think that there's a monolith worldview on any side of the occasion. But it's funny that he's on The View talking about the extremes of these worldviews. And he's basically talking to the main problem. These chicks on The View. From what I've seen, and I'm not sitting up here acting like I watch every episode of The View or any episode for that matter. I may watch the occasional clip where they're having one of their many Trump deranged meltdowns or being outraged over something. But when you have a bunch of entertainment or media elites, which they are completely out of touch with the rest of society. And that is largely what the left has become. A bunch of either they are completely indoctrinated into the extremes, what they would consider some of the more popular extremes of leftist thinking, or they have been shamed into silence. And it's probably a little bit of both. But now that they see, have you noticed that now that you see more and more people coming out, and when they saw that Donald Trump won the popular vote, he didn't just win the electoral college votes, he won the popular vote. Now you see it impacting every aspect of our culture. You're seeing all these entities like Amazon and Facebook, the LA Times, New York Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, who's over Amazon. But you're seeing all these different entities from that had jumped on these leftist talking points, lock, stock, and barrel. Now all of a sudden they're pulling back. You see movies changing their theme. You're seeing Walmart and other stores pulling back on these radical perspectives and LGBT trans related clothing. They're pushing back on it now because they realize that it's not as popular as they thought. Not to mention all of the pushback that places like Harley Davidson got, that Bud Light got for adopting these radical policies. I think what we're seeing right now, and I don't think Donald Trump is behind it. I think he was just a natural, he is the result of people saying, I'm not taking all this. You're not going to be teaching my kids about gender ideology when they're in school, especially in grade school. You're not going to be promoted. You're not going to be having drag queen story hour at my schools. You're not going to be pushing all this LGBT stuff down our throat every step of the way, everywhere we turn. I'm done with it. And all this woke ideology and DEI. People are just fed up with the garbage. And that's people on both sides. And one of the things that that Trump's opponents, that those on the left would tout so often, was they thought racism was behind a lot of what we see, blaming the white man. I mean, the chicks on The View still do it, but that was one thing that they pushed over and over again. But now that you see that more Black folks voted for Donald Trump than any time in recent history, that 65% of Native Americans voted more conservatively, voted for Trump. And that's not just Trump. This is conservative values throughout. The entire nation as a whole went more red. There's no getting around that. Every single state grew increasingly conservative, which I think is a pretty impressive thing. I didn't expect it to be like that. But now that they see more and more people saying they didn't want any part of it, you're seeing a massive shift in the way people think. And these people, like these chicks on The View, just can't understand that. Why? They're in their, what we would call their ivory towers. They make millions of dollars. So the rise in gas and food and housing didn't affect them because they made enough money. They make enough money where they don't see it as a problem. They live in this world where trans this and LGBT that and gay this is all they see. And if you don't accept that, if you aren't willing to accept that, you'll be cast out. You'll be ostracized. They live in that world where that's all they see. So they can't understand why us normal folks look at this like it's a bunch of garbage. Let's continue.
And if they're not going to get their way, they're about complaining and griping about it because they understand that when you are operating based off of grievance, that's usually what provokes you to get to the polls. And that is why they don't mind feeling aggrieved and displaying and disseminating that kind of message, because they know people are going to gravitate to that. And as a result, that might get them to the polls, you thinking you're going to get what you want as a result of it. And in this particular case, the Republicans were right.
So you think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
No, I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party. I think that they're operating against those they believe are extreme on the left. Like, for example, when you talk about the LGBTQ community, I'm a fiscal conservative and I'm a social liberal. I'm fiscal with my dollars. I ain't apologizing for not wanting to pay high taxes to anybody. I'm not apologizing for that, right? But outside of that, I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live, okay? But you had folks on the left that were introducing some things when we got in the whole transgender issue, and they were talking about bathrooms, or they were talking about males transitioning to females and competing against girls in sports and stuff like that. These
That's
are
less than 1% of the population.
I understand that,
But you know what? Add an
That's
area
ridiculous.
in the NFL.
A completely irrelevant point. Who cares if it's less than 1% of the population? I'm pretty sure that some of these folks on The View were the same ones screaming about everybody needing to get vaccinated. I'm pretty sure that somebody who's watching in the chat, if you can recall, if you know of a clip, post it in the chat or in the comment section. Even though it was a very small percentage of the population that were a higher risk, elderly primarily, or those who have a lot of medical issues, I'm pretty sure that they were saying, hey, if you can save just one, then it's worth it. And I would guess that if their kid, maybe, I don't know, these people could be so radical, they probably wouldn't even consider it. But I'm pretty sure that if it was their kid who missed out on an opportunity because some dude who calls himself a female competed against them and took their position, they would be upset about that. Any reasonable person, again, that's the big issue. Any reasonable person who hasn't been indoctrinated into these worldviews would see that as a problem. And I'm sure a lot of these chicks would call themselves feminists. Now, if they cared about females, they would have an issue with this. They would understand, and I know that they do. I don't care what they say. I don't care how the audience claps. I know deep down inside they understand that this whole transgender thing with males competing against females is ridiculous. I'd be willing to bet money that the majority of them who don't agree with it are afraid to admit it because they realize the repercussions that would come if people found out what they really thought.
But see, I think that's where the mistake is made.
Yeah.
You're saying it's ridiculous. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
But
now here's the issue that I have with Stephen A. Smith. I'm going to show you a clip here shortly that wasn't that long ago. Now, is it possible that he changed his mind? I guess so. I doubt it highly because he can be a reasonable dude, even though he's all caught up with the woke stuff and the black victimization, that whole mindset, for the most part. He can be pretty reasonable. But I'll let this clip finish and then I'll show you this other side. And this is where I take issue with Stephen A.
But most of the voters out there don't think like that.
But
that
means they don't have the information.
Okay, but 90% of the voters don't have the information.
And there she goes, because when it's all said and done, what has she been espousing, this Sunny Holston chick, over the last couple of weeks since the election? Uneducated white women, people who don't have a college degree. Like, that makes you more intelligent. No, in my mind, it makes you more indoctrinated. You're more likely to be indoctrinated into worldviews that people with simple, basic common sense don't accept. She's got her degree. She's extremely on the left. So it doesn't make sense. Like, what information would convince anyone who's reasonable that a biological genetic male competing against a female doesn't have advantages? He naturally has advantages. I don't give a crap about how much it is because a scholarship taken from one, or what if it's a team? Your team, like this whole thing with the San Jose volleyball team competing against these other female teams, and you got one dude on the team and he's allowed to continue to play and some local court okayed it. You mean to tell me that one male on the team can make a massive difference? Imagine if there was one male NBA player who played in the WNBA. That one player could have such an impact because the skill, the strength, the speed advantage is so significant that one player, I believe, mediocre, like middle ground player playing in the WNBA, he would be an unstoppable force and he could lead a whole team to a championship. I don't care what the number is. It's happening too much and it's happening all over the place and it needs to be stopped. But here's the issue I have with Stephen A. Smith. Just continue to listen to him.
Information. If you out there busting your tail to make ends meet and to pay your bills, and you're going to work every day, and you got a family to take care of, and you're in New York City, you're getting stuck 2 hours of your day, you're stuck in traffic. You understand? You got a whole bunch of stuff to go through. You don't have time to know what you and I know.
Maybe you need to listen to the news when you're in traffic.
Well, again,
maybe
I agree
not.
with
Not be
that.
uninformed.
Here she goes. Maybe you need to listen to the news. These women on The View, I'm telling you, they make me nauseous. They think they know everything. They think they have all the answers. You have the audience applauding everything, every other thing that they say. So they're in that echo chamber, and that's all that they ever hear. Okay, he was on The View. He voices his opinion. The View has a pretty large audience. I'm assuming. I don't know. It's on network TV. And he says one thing, but listen what he says. Now, granted, this interview, this conversation with Bill O'Reilly was a year ago. It's possible he changed his mind, but I've heard enough of him over the years and even recently where I think deep down inside, this is exactly what he thinks. And he had an opportunity to stand up to these chicks at The View and make a hard, solid case, and he didn't. He wimped out. Take a listen.
Biologically born men who choose as an adult to become a woman, and you're allowed to do that in America. You are allowed to do it. But then they want to get in the pool and swim against the female swimmers or play a sport against. And biologically, everyone knows physiologically, if you're born a male, you are born stronger
Just my point.
than a female. So does it make sense to allow these trans people to compete against women, in your opinion?
In my opinion, no. And I've been on the record stating that. And this is my...
You hear that? In my opinion, no. I've been on the record. So he's clearly made this same case in multiple areas. But somehow when he went on The View, all of a sudden he had a different opinion.
I'm so liberal in my thinking on social issues. I'm fiscally conservative, but on social issues, I'm a really big proponent on living and let living. I believe that everybody should have the same equal rights, civil rights, et cetera, et cetera. I'm very, very big on that. So I'm very supportive of the homosexual community, the transgender community in that regard, et cetera, et cetera. But
and doesn't Stephen A. Smith call himself a Christian? I'm pretty sure I've heard him say that over the years. I've listened to enough First Take back in the day. I don't listen anymore. He probably falls more in line of like that Black liberation theology. I bet you that's more of where he stands, because you cannot be a consistent Christian and support the LGBT movement. Now, I'm not saying that these people should be mistreated. Let me make that very clear. But when it comes down to the reality of it, the whole live and let live thing, I don't think a follower of Jesus should be espousing that, primarily because we're called not to live and let live and live to and do whatever we want to do. We're called to die to ourselves. We're called to be born again and be made new by the Spirit of God and to leave the worldly things behind. And as Romans chapter 12 says, do not be conformed to the pattern or the ways of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. So I take issue with this whole live and let live, let people do whatever they want to do. Now they can, but we should be calling them out of that sinful lifestyle. Those of us who profess to be born again, we should have a passion in our hearts to call the non-believer to repentance.
When you talk about people who are born men competing in a women's sports because they've transitioned to women, that is definitely a discussion that I think that we should all have, because on its face, I don't see how that's possible, nor do I see how it's right to an abundance of to every naturally born female out there who is competing in the world of sports. There's a fairness issue there.
And the only reason it's happening is because of this insane progressive woke culture.
Again, I don't see where that is there's even a debate to be had. Stephen A. had an opportunity when he was on The View to make a strong case. And even though he may get a lot of pushback from the cast on the show to the public in general, but he failed. And I just think he just wasn't willing to face the heat. But let me know what you think. Comment down below, and I'll see you in the next video.